Captain Hyun-soo walked through the corridors of the Indomitable one last time before the battle. He stopped to look at each crew member. There were 247 souls on the ship, young and old, veterans and rookies. All of them had volunteered to stay when he gave them the choice. He reached the bridge and took his command chair. Lieutenant Bora sat at the weapons station. Her fingers moved across the controls with practiced ease. She had served with him for 6 years. She knew what was coming. "All stations report ready, Captain," she said. "Open a channel to the crew," Hyun-soo ordered. The communications officer nodded. Every screen on the ship now showed the captain's face. In the engine rooms and cargo bays, in the medical bay and crew quarters, people stopped what they were doing to listen. "By now you all know that Coalition Command ordered us to retreat," Hyun-soo began. "You also know that we're not going to do that. Some people might call us crazy. They might say we're throwing our lives away for nothing. But I want to tell you about our species, about what humans do when faced with impossible odds." He paused. The bridge was silent except for the hum of the engines. "We survived ice ages that should have killed us. We beat diseases that wiped out millions. We fought wars that destroyed cities and still rebuilt them. We went to space in rockets that exploded half the time. We did all of this because humans have something other species don't. We refuse to accept defeat. We don't care if victory is impossible. We fight anyway." On the lower decks, Private Dong-jun listened to the captain's words. He was 19 years old. This was his first deployment. His hands were shaking as he checked his rifle for the 10th time. Beside him, Soldier Myung placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You scared, kid?" Myung asked. She was 35 and had more combat experience than anyone else in the squad. "Yes," Dong-jun admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you alive. Just remember your training and stick with the squad." Back on the bridge, Hyun-soo continued his speech. "The Vexa think they're unstoppable. They think we're just another species to consume. They're wrong. Today we show them what humans can do. Today we teach the galaxy that some prey species bite back. For Canthor Prime, for humanity, for everyone who said we couldn't win." The crew erupted in cheers. It echoed through every deck of the ship. The sound of people who had accepted death and chosen to make it meaningful. The Indomitable broke from the Coalition formation and accelerated toward the Vexa swarm. The other ships continued their retreat. On the Coalition flagship, generals watched in horrified fascination. This went against every military doctrine they knew. The Vexa noticed the lone ship approaching. Their hive mind calculated threat levels. 1 destroyer against thousands of bioships. It was not even worth diverting resources. A small cluster of fighters moved to intercept. That was their first mistake. The Indomitable didn't slow down or try to evade. It charged straight through the fighter screen. Bora's targeting systems locked onto the lead fighter and fired. Railgun rounds moving at a significant fraction of light speed punched through organic armor like paper. "Direct hit," Bora reported. "Enemy fighter destroyed." "Don't stop shooting," Hyun-soo ordered. "Fire everything we have." The destroyer's weapons blazed. Missiles streaked toward bioships. Point defense lasers carved through Vexa fighters. The ship shook as enemy fire hit the shields. Warning lights flashed across every console. "Shields at 60%, an officer called out. "Keep going," Hyun-soo said calmly. The Vexa hive mind reassessed. This ship was more dangerous than calculated. More fighters diverted toward it. Then cruiser-class bioships began to turn. The human vessel was drawing attention away from the retreating Coalition fleet. On the Coalition flagship, Vrexoth watched the tactical display. The Indomitable was surrounded now. Hundreds of Vexa closed in from all sides. The ship should be dead already, but it kept fighting. "What are they doing?" a Gelthian admiral asked. "They're accepting hits that would cripple any Coalition vessel." "They're buying us time," Vrexoth said quietly. With their lives, the Indomitable's shields failed. Vexa bioplasma burned through armor plating. Sections of the hull vented atmosphere. But the human ship pushed deeper into the swarm. It was targeting the larger bioships now, the ones that served as troop carriers. "Captain, we have boarding alerts," the security officer reported. "Vexa are cutting through the hull on decks 4 and 7. "Deploy the Marines," Hyun-soo ordered. Dong-jun heard the alarm and grabbed his rifle. His squad rushed toward deck 7. The corridor lights flickered. Emergency barriers slammed down behind them. Through a viewport he could see space, and space was full of Vexa. They reached the breach point. A hole the size of a truck gaped in the hull. Force fields kept the air in, but they wouldn't stop the Vexa. The creatures came through in a wave. They looked like a nightmare combination of insects and crustaceans. Razor claws and acid sacs. Eyes that reflected the emergency lights. Open fire! Myung shouted. The humans unleashed hell. Rifles cracked. Grenades exploded. The Vexa kept coming. They didn't retreat or take cover. The hive mind just pushed more bodies into the breach. Dongjun fired until his rifle overheated. He dropped it and pulled his sidearm. A Vexa lunged at him. He shot it in the face. Another one came. He shot that one too. His ears rang from the gunfire. His lungs burned from the smoke. Myung charged forward with a flamethrower. The weapon was considered barbaric by coalition standards. Too cruel. Too indiscriminate. But humans had learned long ago that sometimes you needed fire to cleanse an infestation. The Vexa screeched as they burned. Fall back to the next junction, Myung ordered. Set charges. The squad retreated in good order. They laid explosives along the corridor. When the Vexa followed, Dongjun hit the detonator. The explosion sealed the breach and killed everything in that section. Similar battles raged across the ship. Marines fought in corridors and cargo bays. They used weapons the coalition had banned. Chemical bombs, fragmentation grenades, white phosphorus, tools of war that other species found horrifying, but they worked. The Vexa couldn't adapt fast enough. They were used to opponents who followed rules, who valued individual lives, who retreated when casualties mounted. Humans did none of those things. They held positions until they were overrun. They detonated charges with themselves, still in the blast radius. They fought with knives when their guns ran dry. On the bridge, Hyun-soo watched his ship die around him. 3/4 of the crew were dead or wounded. The engines were failing. Life support was gone on half the decks. But they had accomplished something remarkable. The tactical display showed the Vexa formation. It was disrupted. Hundreds of bioships had diverted to deal with the Indomitable. The hive mind was confused. This didn't match any behavior pattern in their genetic memory. Prey didn't act this way. Captain, we've lost main power, Bora reported. Her face was covered in blood from a head wound. Batteries only. 5 minutes until total failure. Hyun-soo smiled. It was the smile of a man who had done his job well. Set collision course for that carrier. The big one. Ram it. Sir, we have escape pods. Not enough for everyone still alive. And I'm not leaving anyone behind. He opened the shipwide channel one last time. All hands, this is the captain. It's been an honor serving with you. We made them pay. We showed them humans don't run. Brace for impact. The Indomitable used its last power to accelerate. Dead in space, but not dead yet. The ship slammed into a Vexa carrier at tremendous speed. The explosion lit up the space around Canthor Prime like a new star. On the Coalition flagship, every officer stood in silence. They had just watched a single ship and its crew sacrifice themselves, not for victory, not for glory, but to buy strangers time to escape. Rexoth's translator finally spoke. By all the spirits of my ancestors, what are these humans? Commander Taesung appeared on the bridge. He had been watching from the observation deck. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes were wet. They're heroes, he said simply. And they won't be the last. The war room fell silent as another red marker disappeared from the holographic map. That made 47 star systems lost in just 3 months. Commander Taesung stood at the back of the chamber, watching the alien generals argue among themselves. Their translator devices buzzed with a dozen different languages, but the message was always the same. Retreat. Preserve forces. Live to fight another day. The Vexa swarm had come from beyond the galactic rim like a plague of locusts. They consumed everything in their path. Planets, stations, entire civilizations vanished into their bioships. The Galactic Coalition had ruled this sector of space for 2,000 years. 12 species working together in peace and prosperity. Now they were dying. High Chancellor Rexoth raised his forearms for silence. The insectoid leader's compound eyes reflected the dim light of the war room. His voice came through the translators as a series of clicks and whistles. We must evacuate Canthor Prime, he said. Our projections show the Vexa will breach our orbital defenses within 2 days. We cannot hold this world. The other generals nodded their agreement. Some had scales, others had fur or crystalline skin. All of them looked defeated. Taesung had seen that look before in human history books. It was the look of people who had already given up. Ambassador Jiwoo stood beside him. She was the human diplomatic liaison to the coalition. Her job was to observe and report, not to interfere, but her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "They're just going to run again," she whispered to Taesung. "That's their way," he replied quietly. "They value life above victory. What good is life if you lose everything worth living for?" Taesung had no answer for that. Humans were the newest members of the coalition. They had been welcomed with open arms just 5 years ago. But in military matters, the older species treated them like children, too aggressive, too violent, too willing to sacrifice for victory. The meeting continued. General after general proposed different evacuation routes. How many ships could they save? Which colonies should they abandon first? No one talked about fighting back. No one suggested standing their ground. Taesung had been studying the Vexa tactics for months. He had noticed something important. The swarm always expected their enemies to retreat. They adapted to cautious strategies and defensive positions, but they had never faced an opponent willing to charge straight at them. He stepped forward. The conversation stopped. Several aliens turned to look at him with surprise. Humans rarely spoke at these meetings. "Commander Taesung," Rexoth said, "do you have something to contribute?" "I have a plan," Taesung said. "A way to hold Canthor Prime and maybe even push the Vexa back." A Gelthian admiral made a sound like water gurgling. It was their species' way of laughing. "Young human, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is not the time for bold gestures. We must think of the billions of lives at stake." "I am thinking of them," Taesung replied. He walked to the holographic display and pointed at the Vexa formation approaching Canthor Prime. "The swarm commits everything to their attacks. They don't keep reserves. If we could break their assault here, they would have to retreat and regroup. That would buy us months. And how do you propose we break an assault that outnumbers us 5-1? Another admiral asked. Taesung began explaining his strategy. He proposed using the human fleet as a spearhead. They would charge directly into the center of the Vexa formation, ignoring their own casualties. While the swarm was distracted, coalition forces could strike at their flanks. It would be devastating. Thousands would die, but it might work. The room erupted in protest. The alien generals were horrified. They called it suicide, madness, a waste of valuable ships and personnel. Frexoth raised his arms again for silence. "Commander, your plan requires accepting catastrophic losses. By our calculations, 70% of the human fleet would be destroyed. We cannot ask you to make such a sacrifice, Wang." "You're not asking," Taesung said. "We're volunteering." Jiwoo watched the exchange with growing dread. She knew Taesung was serious. She had seen that look in his eyes before. It was the same look human soldiers wore when they charged machine gun nests in the old wars, when they held impossible positions against overwhelming odds, when they refused to surrender even when defeat was certain. The coalition rejected his plan. The vote was unanimous. Canthor Prime would be evacuated. The fleet would retreat to the inner systems. They would trade space for time and hope the Vexa eventually overextended themselves. That night, Taesung met with Captain Hyun-soo in a quiet bar near the spaceport. Hyun-soo commanded the human destroyer Indomitable. He was a veteran of the border wars back when humans fought among themselves. He had scars on his face and cold eyes that had seen too much death. "They said no," Taesung told him. "I figured they would," Hyun-soo said. He took a drink. "So what are we going to do?" "What we always do. What humans have always done." Hyun-soo smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "You want me to disobey a direct order from Coalition Command? I want you to do what's right." The captain considered this for a long moment. Then he stood up. "I'll talk to my crew, but I think I already know what they'll say." 2 days later, the Vexa swarm arrived at Canthor Prime. Their bioships blotted out the stars. Millions of creatures bred for war and consumption. The orbital defenses opened fire, but it was like shooting at an ocean. The Vexa kept coming. Coalition Command gave the order to retreat. One by one, the ships began pulling back. Cruisers, carriers, and frigates turned away from the enemy. They left the defense platforms to buy time for their escape. Jiwoo was aboard the Coalition flagship when it happened. She was watching the tactical display when one ship broke formation. A single human destroyer moving in the opposite direction of the fleet. It was accelerating toward the Vexa swarm. "What is that ship doing?" Frexoth demanded. It's the Indomitable, an officer reported. Captain Hyun-soo is not responding to hails. Ji-woo's heart sank. She knew what was happening. Tae-sung's plan was going forward anyway. Without support. Without backup. Just one ship and one crew choosing to fight when everyone else was running away. The Indomitable drove into the center of the Vexa formation like a spear. Its weapons blazed. Missiles and railgun rounds tore into bioships. The Vexa turned to focus on this lone attacker. They couldn't understand what they were seeing. Why would prey rush toward predators? On the flagship's view screen, the Indomitable disappeared into a cloud of Vexa fighters. But its weapons never stopped firing. The ship was accepting damage that would make any coalition captain retreat immediately. But the humans kept pushing forward. Rexoth stared at the display. His translator was silent. He had no words for what he was witnessing. Ji-woo did. She had read the history books. She knew the stories of Thermopylae and the Alamo, of soldiers who stood and fought when any sane person would run, of victories snatched from certain defeat by people too stubborn to accept the inevitable. Those crazy, beautiful fools, she whispered. The battle had just begun. News of the Indomitable's stand spread across human space like wildfire. The ship's last transmission had been broadcast on every channel. Captain Hyun-soo's final words. The crew's sacrifice. One destroyer against an entire swarm. The recruitment centers were flooded within hours. Young people lined up around city blocks. Veterans came out of retirement. Even civilians with no military training volunteered. They all wanted to fight. They all wanted to honor the dead. Commander Tae-sung stood in the human military headquarters on New Seoul Station. Reports scrolled across his screen. 5,000 soldiers ready to deploy. 200 ships from the reserve fleet being pulled out of mothballs. It wasn't much compared to the Vexa swarm, but it was what they had. Ambassador Ji-woo entered his office. She looked exhausted. The coalition leadership had been arguing for 3 days about what to do with the human volunteers. They're calling it madness, she said. They won't provide support for an operation to retake Canthor Prime. Rexoth says he can't order more people to die on a suicide mission. He's not ordering anyone, Tae-sung replied. We're going anyway. Did you secure the supply shipments? Ji-woo nodded. Barely. I had to promise this wouldn't commit coalition resources. We're on our own. We always have been. Colonel Jae-hee walked into the office carrying a datapad. She commanded the Marine forces. Her reputation was legendary among human military circles. She had cleared pirate stations single-handedly. She had survived situations that should have killed her 3 times over. The troops are ready, Jae-hee reported. I've been drilling them on close-quarters combat. The Vexa like to build nests in enclosed spaces. We'll need to go in and dig them out room by room. What about weapons? Hae-sung asked. I've requisitioned everything the coalition considers too dangerous. Flamethrowers, plasma charges, chemical weapons. If it's banned by the Warfare Convention, we're bringing it. Ji-woo looked uncomfortable. The other species are going to be horrified. Let them be horrified, Jae-hee said coldly. We're not trying to win a popularity contest. We're trying to survive. The human fleet assembled at the edge of coalition space. 200 ships of various classes. Most were old. Some had been scheduled for decommission. They were crewed by volunteers who knew the odds. But every ship flew the flag of humanity alongside their national colors. Tae-sung addressed the fleet from his command ship. Canthor Prime is occupied by the Vexa. The coalition has written it off. They think it's lost, but we're going to take it back. Not because it's easy, not because we're sure we can win, but because someone has to draw a line and say no further. He paused. The fleet was silent, waiting. The Vexa consume everything. They've never been stopped. They've never been pushed back. That ends today. We're going to show them that humans don't surrender. We don't run. And we definitely don't give up our worlds without a fight. The fleet jumped to hyperspace. They emerged at Canthor Prime 3 days later. The planet was covered in Vexa biostructures. The beautiful cities and forests were being consumed, converted into organic matter for the swarm. Deploy all forces, Tae-sung ordered. Jae-hee, take your Marines planetside. Target the nesting sites. Burn everything. The ships descended through the atmosphere. Vexa fighters rose to meet them. The space above the planet erupted into battle. Human pilots flew with aggressive tactics that confused the swarm. They accepted hits that would make coalition pilots eject. They rammed enemy fighters when they ran out of ammunition. Jaehee's dropship landed in what used to be the capital city. Now it was a nightmare landscape of organic structures and Vexa tunnels. Her Marines poured out with weapons ready. Corporal Minho was her demolitions expert. He carried enough explosives to level a city block. He looked at the Vexa structures with professional interest. "Those support columns," he said. "If we take them out, the whole nest collapses. Can you get close enough to plant charges?" Jaehee asked. "Probably. Might not make it back out, though. That's why we're all here. Let's move." The Marines advanced into the city. They moved in squads, covering each other, checking every corner. The Vexa were everywhere. They dropped from above. They tunneled up from below. They came in waves that never seemed to end. But the humans had learned from the Indomitable. They didn't retreat. They held their ground and made the Vexa pay for every meter. Flamethrowers cleared intersections. Grenades collapsed tunnels. Chemical weapons poisoned Vexa breeding pits. Minho's team reached the first support column. It was massive. Organic material that pulsed with the hive mind signals. He placed shaped charges around the base while his squad held off the defenders. "Charges set," he reported. 30 seconds they ran. The explosion shook the ground. The massive column collapsed. Half of the Vexa nest came down with it. Thousands of creatures were crushed or buried. Above the planet, the battle continued. Human ships fought in close formation. They covered each other's weaknesses. When one ship was disabled, another would tow it clear while still fighting. No one was left behind. The coalition fleet watched from a distance. They had come despite orders to stay away. Junior officers who couldn't stomach leaving humans to fight alone. A few ships at first, then more as word spread. Rexoth himself arrived on the third day of the battle. His flagship dropped out of hyperspace and immediately began providing orbital support fire. Other ships followed his example. The tide was starting to turn. On the ground, Jaehee's forces pushed deeper into Vexa territory. They were exhausted, running low on ammunition. Casualties were heavy, but they kept advancing. Minho planted his last set of charges at what appeared to be a central hive node. The structure was enormous. It reached deep underground. Vexa defenders swarmed from every direction to protect it. "Colonel, this is it," Minho transmitted. "The big one, but I need 10 minutes to set up properly." "You've got 5, Jaehee replied. "That's all we can hold." Her Marines formed a perimeter around Minho's position. They fired until their barrels glowed red. They used every weapon they had. The Vexa kept coming, driven by the hive mind's desperate need to protect the node. A Vexa warrior broke through the line. It was huge, twice the size of a normal soldier. It charged straight at Minho. He looked up from his work. No time to grab a weapon. The creature was 3 meters away. 2 meters. 1 meter, a burst of gunfire cut it down. Jaehee stood there with a smoking rifle. "Finish your work, Corporal." Minho armed the charges. "Everyone clear out. This is going to be big." The Marines retreated in good order, fighting every step, buying time for everyone to get clear. When they were far enough away, Minho hit the detonator. The explosion was visible from orbit. It tore through the underground nest system. Miles of Vexa tunnels collapsed. The hive mind's local coordination was severed. The creatures on the surface became disorganized. Confused, human forces pressed the advantage. They pushed the Vexa back, block by block, district by district. The fighting was brutal, hand-to-hand in the darkness. Humans used night vision equipment to hunt in the ruins. On the 5th day, something unprecedented happened. A group of Vexa began to retreat, not in an organized fashion, just running, fleeing from the humans who wouldn't stop coming. In orbit, Taesung watched the tactical display. The Vexa were pulling back. Not just on Canthor Prime. Ships were leaving the system, heading back toward their territory. "They're retreating," an officer said in disbelief. "The Vexa are actually retreating." Rexoth's voice came over the communications channel. "Commander Taesung, what have you done?" "We showed them they can bleed," Taesung replied. "We showed them they can lose. That's all it took." Jiwoo stood beside him. She was crying, not from sadness but from pride. "We did it. Against all odds. We actually did it." But Taesung was looking at the casualty reports. 3,000 dead, another 1,000 wounded, nearly 2/3 of their force. The victory had cost them everything. He thought about Captain Hyun-soo, about the crew of the Indomitable. They had started this. They had shown the way. Now others had followed. And together they had achieved the impossible. Send a message to all human forces, Taesung said. Well done. You've earned your rest, but even as he said it, he knew the truth. This was just the beginning. The Vexa would regroup. They would adapt. The real war was still to come. Commander Taesung sat in the medical bay 3 weeks after the liberation of Canthor Prime. His left arm was wrapped in regeneration bandages. Vexa bioacid had eaten through his armor during the final push. The doctors said he would heal, but the scars would be permanent. He didn't care about the scars. He cared about the reports on his datapad. The Vexa had regrouped faster than expected. They were coming back with reinforcements. Intelligence estimated 3 times the force that had initially taken Canthor Prime. You should be resting, Medic Yunji said as she checked his bandages. She was young but had aged years during the battle. She had performed surgery in collapsed buildings while Vexa attacked. She had saved soldiers the coalition medics had declared beyond help. Can't rest, Taesung replied. They're coming back. Then let someone else handle it. You've done enough. He looked at her. Really looked at her. She had dark circles under her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly. But she was still here. Still working. Like all the other survivors. Nobody else knows how to fight them, he said simply. Above Canthor Prime, the human fleet was being rebuilt. Ships were being repaired. Ammunition was being manufactured. Volunteers continued to arrive from Earth and the colonies. Word had spread about the victory. About humans pushing back the unstoppable swarm. But the coalition military was divided. Half wanted to support the humans. The other half thought it was a waste of resources. They argued that Canthor Prime couldn't be held against another assault. Better to evacuate now while they still could. Pilot Sangwoo didn't care about the politics. He sat in his fighter's cockpit running pre-flight checks. His squadron had lost 12 pilots in the first battle. The replacements were green. Kids who had never seen combat. But they would learn fast or they would die. Squadron leader, you have incoming transmission, his communications officer said. Sangwoo accepted it. Commander Taesung appeared on his screen. The commander looked tired, injured, but his eyes were sharp. We need reconnaissance flights, Taesung said. The Vexa are massing at the system's edge. I need to know their numbers and formation. That's a suicide mission, sir, Sangwoo replied. They'll see us coming, I know. That's why I'm not ordering you. I'm asking for volunteers, Sangwoo smiled grimly. When do we leave? 3 fighters launched an hour later. They flew without shields to reduce their energy signature. Their equipment was barely functional, held together with spare parts and hope. But the pilots were determined. They reached the system's edge and activated their scanners. What they saw made Sangwoo's blood run cold. The Vexa fleet stretched for thousands of kilometers. Bioships of every size. Carriers, destroyers, and massive dreadnoughts. It was the largest force he had ever seen. Getting the data, his sensor officer transmitted. Holy ancestors. There must be 10,000 ships. We're outnumbered 50 to 1, another pilot said. Then we make every shot count, Sangwoo replied. Send the data back to base. All of it. Vexa fighters detected them. The hunters became the hunted. Sangwoo's squadron ran for their lives. 2 fighters were destroyed before they could reach the safety of Canthor Prime's defensive grid. Sangwoo barely made it back. His ship was so damaged it would never fly again. Taesung reviewed the reconnaissance data with a sinking feeling. The math was simple. The Vexa outnumbered them by an impossible margin. Even with coalition support, they couldn't win. Not by conventional means. Sergeant Wu Jin's platoon was stationed at the northern approach to the capital. It was the most likely invasion point. Geographic features created a natural choke point. A bridge across a deep ravine. If the Vexa came this way, Wu Jin's people would be the first line of defense. He inspected the fortifications his troops had built. Machine gun nests, artillery positions, minefields, it wouldn't be enough. But it was all they had. Sergeant, how long can we hold this position? A young soldier asked. Wu Jin looked at the defenses, at his 30 troops. At the killing ground they had created. Long enough, he said. That's all that matters. The Vexa arrived 6 days later. The sky turned dark with bioships. They descended through the atmosphere like rain. Thousands of drop pods. Tens of thousands of warriors. They came with the confidence of a species that had never truly lost. They came to the bridge. Wu Jin watched them approach through his rifle scope, wave after wave. More than he could count. More than he could kill. But that didn't matter. His orders were to hold. So he would hold. Wait for my signal, he said calmly. Let them get close. Make every bullet count. The Vexa crossed the minefield. Explosions tore through their ranks. But more kept coming. They reached the bridge. Started crossing, now. Wu Jin shouted, his platoon opened fire. Machine guns tore into the packed Vexa formations. Artillery shells exploded among them. The bridge became a slaughterhouse. Bodies fell into the ravine. But the swarm didn't stop. They pushed forward over their own dead. The battle lasted 18 hours. Wu Jin's troops fought until their ammunition ran low. Then they fought with grenades. Then with knives. The Vexa never stopped attacking. The hive mind just pushed more bodies forward. Reinforcements never came. They were needed elsewhere. The battle for Canthor Prime was happening everywhere at once. Every unit was engaged. Every position was under assault. Wu Jin was down to 6 soldiers when the bridge finally collapsed. The Vexa had damaged the supports with their acid. The entire structure fell into the ravine. Thousands of warriors fell with it. The approach was blocked by rubble. Fall back, Wu Jin ordered. His voice was hoarse from shouting. We've done what we can. They retreated to the secondary positions. The Vexa found another way across. They always did. But Wu Jin's platoon had bought 3 hours. 3 hours for civilians to evacuate. 3 hours for reinforcements to be repositioned. 3 hours that saved thousands of lives. In the coalition headquarters, far from the battle, admirals watched the tactical displays. They saw human units holding impossible positions, taking casualties that would break any coalition force, and still fighting. This is madness, a Gelthian admiral said. They're accepting 60% casualties in some units. 70%. They should retreat. They don't retreat, Vrexoth said quietly. He had been watching the humans fight for days now, studying their tactics. That's what we don't understand. Retreat is not an option in their minds. They hold until they win or until they die. It's inefficient, wasteful. Is it? Vrexoth pulled up data from the battles. Look at the Vexa casualty rates. For every human that falls, they kill 10 Vexa, 20 in some engagements. The humans lose the tactical battle but win the strategic one. A young Vraxis captain was also watching. His species had always been considered the most warlike in the coalition. But even they had never fought like this. He made a decision. I'm taking my ship back to Canthor Prime, he announced. That's against orders, an admiral protested. Then court-martial me. I won't sit here while humans die defending worlds we abandoned. He left. Others followed. First one ship, then 5, then 20. Junior officers who couldn't stomach watching from safety. They jumped to Canthor Prime without authorization. Taesung received word that coalition ships were arriving. He didn't know why. Didn't care. He just deployed them where they were needed most. The Vraxis battleship provided orbital bombardment that broke up Vexa formations. Other ships evacuated wounded and brought supplies. The tide began to turn. Not because humans were winning, but because they refused to lose. And that refusal was infectious. The coalition forces began to fight differently, holding positions longer, taking more risks. They were learning from the humans. On the ground, Yunji worked in a makeshift hospital. The wounded kept coming. Burns from Vexa acid, missing limbs, infections from bioweapons. She saved everyone she could. Even when the coalition protocols said to let them go, she performed surgery on Sergeant Wu Jin. He had lost his right leg below the knee. Vexa acid burns covered 30% of his body. By coalition standards, his injuries were too severe for the battlefield triage. But Yunji didn't follow coalition standards. She worked for 6 hours straight, used experimental treatments, pushed her skills to the limit. When she was done, Wu Jin would live. He would even fight again with prosthetics. Why? He asked her weakly. Why not let me go? Save someone less damaged? Because you're not done yet, Yunji replied. Because we need every soldier. Because humans don't give up. Not on the mission. Not on each other. The battle for Canthor Prime lasted 3 weeks. By the end, the Vexa were in full retreat. They had lost more forces in this engagement than in their previous 100 conquests combined. The hive mind was confused, damaged. Its tactics were no longer working. Taesung stood among the ruins of the capital. Around him, human and coalition soldiers worked together to clear rubble, To find survivors? The city was destroyed, but it was free. Ji Woo found him there. She looked at the devastation with haunted eyes. Was it worth it? Taesung thought about all the dead, about the Indomitable's crew, about every soldier who had fought here. Ask me again in a year, he said. When we've rebuilt. When people are living here again. Then I'll tell you if it was worth it. 6 months after the Second Battle of Canthor Prime, Ambassador Ji Woo stood before the Coalition High Council. The chamber was massive. Representatives from 12 species sat in a circular arrangement. All eyes were on her. The Coalition formally requests expanded human military participation in the war effort, High Chancellor Vrexoth announced. We ask that Commander Taesung establish a training program, that human advisors be integrated into our command structure, and that human combat forces be deployed across all active fronts. Ji Woo had waited months to hear those words, but now that they came, she felt the weight of responsibility. The human government accepts, on one condition. Our methods are unconventional. They will seem brutal to you. You must give our commanders freedom to operate as they see fit. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some species supported the proposal immediately. Others were horrified by the implications. Fighting the human way meant accepting casualties. It meant aggressive tactics. It meant doing things the Coalition had considered barbaric for centuries. A Gelthian counselor raised a tentacle. What you're asking us to do goes against everything we've built. Our civilization was founded on preserving life, not throwing it away. We're not asking you to throw lives away, Ji Woo replied. We're asking you to understand that sometimes sacrifice is necessary, that some things are worth dying for. You've been running from the Vexa for 3 years. It hasn't worked. Try something different. The vote was close, but it passed. Humanity would train the Coalition to fight. Commander Taesung arrived at the Coalition Military Academy 2 weeks later. He brought a team of instructors, veterans from Canthor Prime, people who had faced the Vexa and survived. Their first class had 200 students from 8 different species. Taesung stood before them in the training hall. Everything you learned before is wrong, he began. Your instinct is to preserve your forces, to retreat when outnumbered, to value survival over victory. Those instincts will get you killed by the Vexa. He pulled up a tactical simulation, a standard Coalition defensive position, fortified, logical, designed to minimize casualties. This is how you would defend against a Vexa attack, Taesung said. Now watch how we do it. The simulation changed. The human defensive position was smaller, more concentrated. It had fewer retreat routes, but it had overlapping fields of fire. Kill zones designed to maximize enemy casualties. Positions designed to be held no matter the cost. You're inviting them to attack you, a Vraxis officer observed. Exactly. Because if we choose the battlefield, we control the terms. The Vexa are predictable. They always commit fully. We use that against them. The training was brutal. Alien officers were pushed beyond what their cultures considered acceptable. They ran obstacle courses until they collapsed. They practiced urban combat in hostile environments. They learned to fight when wounded, to hold positions when surrounded, to keep going when any sane person would surrender. Colonel Jae-hee ran the close combat training. She was merciless. Your species have reach advantages, she told a class of Vraxis soldiers. Their forearms could wield multiple weapons, but you're afraid to get close. The Vexa will drag you into close quarters anyway. Better to go there willingly and control the engagement, she demonstrated with a combat knife, showed them vital points on Vexa anatomy, taught them to embrace the violence instead of fearing it. A young Gelthian named Polshek struggled with the training. His species were peaceful by nature. Conflict resolution through communication was their way. Physical violence made him uncomfortable. I can't do this, he admitted to Jae-hee after a particularly difficult session. My people aren't warriors. Nobody is born a warrior, Jae-hee replied. You become one through training, through necessity. Do you want to survive? Yes, then learn to fight. Your enemy won't care about your cultural preferences. Across the Coalition, similar scenes played out. Human advisors were embedded with every major military unit. They taught tactics. They shared experiences. They showed the others how humans had survived against impossible odds. Not everyone accepted the lessons. Some Coalition officers refused to work with humans. They saw the aggressive tactics as wasteful, unnecessary. They filed complaints with their governments, but the younger officers paid attention. They studied the battles at Canthor Prime. They watched recordings of human forces in action. They began to understand that there was a method to what seemed like madness. Private Haiwan became an unexpected symbol of human resilience. She had lost both legs during the first battle of Canthor Prime. Vexa acid had destroyed everything below her knees. By coalition medical standards, her military career was over, but Haiwan refused to accept that. She worked with engineers to develop better combat prosthetics, artificial legs that could handle the strain of military operations. She spent months in physical therapy, learning to walk again, then to run, then to fight. She returned to active duty 6 months after her injury. Her unit was skeptical at first, but she proved herself in training, kept up with able-bodied soldiers, passed every test. When her story spread, it inspired others. Wounded coalition soldiers who would have retired started asking for prosthetics, for rehabilitation programs, for a chance to return to the fight. The human attitude toward injury was spreading. Damage was not the end. It was just another obstacle to overcome. Jiwoo spent her days navigating coalition politics. There was significant backlash against the human military expansion. Pacifist factions protested. They called it militarization, a corruption of coalition values. They said the humans were making everyone more violent. She met with one protest leader, a Centauri philosopher named Kextal. His species had never participated in warfare. They believed all conflict could be resolved peacefully. You're teaching the young to embrace death, Kextal argued, to see violence as a solution. I'm teaching them to survive, Jiwoo replied. The Vexa don't negotiate. They don't compromise. They consume. Your philosophy works wonderfully in peacetime. But we're at war. Then we should find a way to communicate with the Vexa to understand their needs. We tried that. The Vexa ate the diplomats. All of them. Because that's what they do. Some enemies can't be reasoned with. They can only be stopped. It was a conversation that repeated itself across coalition space. The older generation struggled to adapt. They had built a civilization on cooperation and mutual understanding. The concept of an enemy that couldn't be negotiated with was foreign to them. But reality didn't care about philosophy. The Vexa kept attacking, and the coalition forces using human tactics were winning. A turning point came 4 months into the training program. A Vexa assault hit a coalition colony in the outer systems. The defending force was led by a Gelthian admiral named Thexnor. He had completed the human military training. He was also facing a Vexa force 3 times his size. Everyone expected him to order an evacuation. That was standard doctrine. Save what you can and retreat. But Thexnor had learned from the humans. He ordered his forces to hold the line. The battle lasted 2 days. Thexnor's forces took heavy casualties, 40% losses, higher than any coalition force had ever accepted before. But they held, and when Vexa reinforcements were delayed by human raiders, the tide turned. The swarm retreated. It was the first time a non-human coalition commander had repelled a major Vexa assault without human direct support. The victory was reported across coalition space. It proved that the tactics worked, that others could learn the human way of war. Vrexoth himself attended the next phase of training. The High Chancellor was old. His species typically retired from active service at his age, but he wanted to understand what his forces were learning. Tae-sung met him in the simulation room. Chancellor, with respect, you don't need to do this. You're a leader. You command from headquarters. That's the coalition way, Vrexoth replied. But you've shown us the coalition way is failing. I will learn as my soldiers learn. They ran a simulation together. A defensive scenario. Vexa attacking a fortified position. Tae-sung watched as Vrexoth made decisions. The Chancellor was cautious, logical. He preserved his forces well, but he also ordered a retreat when the Vexa pressure became too heavy. You lost the position, Tae-sung said when the simulation ended. But I saved 60% of my forces. That's acceptable by our standards. By your standards. But look at the strategic result. Tae-sung pulled up the larger map. The Vexa now control that position. They can use it to threaten 3 colonies. You'll lose more people in the long run than if you'd held the line. Vrexoth studied the data. His compound eyes reflected the holographic display. This is difficult for my species. We evolved as prey animals. Every instinct tells us to flee from overwhelming threat. Humans evolved as persistence hunters, Tae-sung replied. We chased our prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We're built for the long fight, but instincts can be overcome with training, with understanding. You don't need to become human. You just need to understand when to fight and when the cost of running is too high. They ran the simulation again. This time Vrexoth held the position longer, accepted higher casualties, used more aggressive tactics. The result was a narrow victory. His force was badly damaged, but the Vexo were repelled. The strategic position held,